My name is Dmytro Tuzhanskyi. I'm director of the Institute for Central European Strategy and will be moderator of this panel, the first panel of the day, under the big idea of the challenge how to find the common language in a very polarized world. And our exact panel will be under the title, Structuring the Chaos, What Media can do to mend the fractured world. And let me please to introduce you our very nice and I think diverse in terms of expertise speakers. And yeah, so let me start from Carolina Amoroso, so Argentine journalist, television host, who has also expertise in in-depth journalism and also writing books. Yeah, the second speaker is Terrell Starr, international observer and the founder of Black Diplomats podcast. I really recommend you to watch, to listen. I did it last few days. Also, Yevhen Hlibovytsky. He is a founder of newly established institute, Frontier Institute, and also the member of the Supreme Board of the National Public Broadcasting Company of Ukraine. Yeah, in English it sounds a bit different than in Ukraine. That's why I should read it. Yeah, and last but not least, and this is my pleasure also to introduce you, so Olga Aivazovska, the chairperson of the board of the Civil Network OPORA. Yes, and we have just 1 hour, and I really asked in advance my speakers to be as short as possible, and my idea was to start immediately from the direct question to them. But let me just start from 2 tricks, let's say like this. One, and I asked this Carolina about the stupid jokes. Yeah, it's hard to be, let's say, funny at this moment in Ukraine, but Carolina, and this is not a joke, by the way, got married a few weeks ago. And you know, right now in Ukraine, marriage, I don't want to sound old-fashioned, but it's kind of a sign that life is going on. And so yeah, let's congratulate Carolina in this sense. So she changed her honeymoon because of our exact forum. And yeah, so you will be the first who should answer my first question. And the first question is a very, let's say, theories, of course, but I think very, it's not theoretical. So the question is, so in this polarized world, where you see the roots of this polarization? Yes, so what is the nature of this polarization? Yes, we know, and we all discussed about bubbles. We are all in different bubbles. But why we ended up with this very polarized world, and what is the role of media in terms of actually these consequences? Yeah, so...
Well, I have various hypotheses about it. Thank you very much to you for the presentation and to everyone at the forum for the invitation. Thank you all for coming. I would give certainly a relative power to media in terms of its power to mend a fractured world. I think our aspirations should be maybe a bit more humble, but very important. And that does not mean that we do not have an ethical imperative to work towards a more objective take on certain events that are going on in the world and that have certainly caused a lot of human suffering. And I do believe that polarization is at the root of many of the problems we are seeing today. I would say that media has a role in polarization because polarization is a business. And what I mean by this is I have come across what I call like a certain realization in our ecosystem, our media ecosystem in Argentina, which is that at a certain time of the day, particularly maybe around 6 o'clock, where the prime where the prime time television starts, it's the end of the truth. It's church time. It's time for reconfirming beliefs, but not time for putting the facts out there. And some people are only getting their information out of sources like that are reconfirming beliefs. And I think that we have a role in improving and facilitating a better conversation as long as we understand that that can come in tension with the business and the metrics. In particular, it happens a lot in television that the more polarizing content has a lot of success and has more success than maybe the more objective and strictly journalistic approach on what is going on in our country and around the world. But we do have an ethics that we should always stick to. We do have a moral imperative towards our societies, and I think we should remember that, especially in church time.
Thank you very much for this very insightful start. And Terrell, the same question actually to you. So what is the roots of polarization actually? And what do you think? Maybe we put a lot of over expectations towards media in their role and in this sense. So right now media, they more how to say, a springboard for this polarization, or they could really help to manage with them?
So one of the things that we have to remember is that polarization has always been in our media system. People assume that it just started with social media. That's not true. In the United States, at the early founding of our country, we had far more parties than Democrats and Republicans. There were dozens of them, and each party had their own newspaper. And it was based on sensationalism. And so this has always been an analog issue. There's a saying in journalism, particularly when I started in journalism school, is if it leads, it bleeds. So that always existed. And right now, what's happening is that the genesis of journalism has always been based on the First Amendment in the United States of America. And what determined who was a journalist or not was really about where you work. And so now, when people talk about polarization in the United States, it's spoken about as if there was a time where divisions didn't exist, or there was this golden age where facts reigned supreme. And the reality is that that is really not as true as we think it is. The reality is that before the internet, network television, radio, and your newspapers were the few places where you could get information. With the advent of social media, you have far more options now. And so I think that actually worked out in our favor, because the Constitution, our First Amendment, empowered us with speech. Some people just professionalize speech and call it journalism. The challenge now is that you have more people who are not trained in the art of journalism or the ethics of journalism that are exercising their First Amendment speech, and it's getting blurred in with what journalism is. And so I don't think that it's a burden on us so much. It's just the new system that we're in right now, and that the audience has to be, we never learned media literacy. That's something that never has taken place. And so it's been the media, mainstream media, that has distilled information for all of us, and the media decided this is what's good and this is what's not. However, now that responsibility is being placed on the general public. And they're not trained to do that. Our responsibility is to take information, fact check it, and learn it. That's not something that the general population was ever taught. And so I think now the burden is really on all of us collectively to understand the news that we're consuming, and also as journalists to be sure that we're as honest and as fair as possible with why we are delivering the news in the way that we're doing.
Thank you very much. And right now I propose, thanks to Olga, if I may, to look at this question from a very political and social perspective. So what is the real roots right now of polarization, the exactly moment? Yeah, not these historical patterns. Yes, of course, polarization was always in place. But what is right now, where these roots are?
Thank you for your question, and hello to everyone. First of all, I believe that I need to start from the joke too. Not so many people knew how many stupid people there are across your house before social media was developed. And you know that it's easier to speak honestly via social media in indirect methods than directly, face to face. That's why so many people are sharing and spread so many aggressive, sometimes emotional, and stupid things, because they are not thinking about this messaging or conversations as about official. At the same time, we need to look on data. And I try to find something which can answer to our questions, but it's not the whole world picture, because first of all, we are speaking about those countries who have electoral political processes, which has diversity inside the society, because we need to speak that polarization sometimes has causation that people has right to speak or have channels for speaking, because if you will try to ask people in Northern Korea what they are thinking about the government or others, you will see that there is no polarization inside the society. That's why sometimes diversity has another side, it's polarization, but this monopolization of power or truth will produce another things as totalitarian regime or authoritarian regime. UNESCO ordered survey, and I have to speak that 85% of people in 16 countries, mostly it was about democratic countries, concerned about impact of disinformation in their countries, because such type of disinformation has different channels for spreading this information, not like in totalitarian countries. Global Rights Perception Survey organized by the World Economic Forum has another evidences about influence of polarization and misinformation. Misinformation and disinformation and society polarization are seen responses to be the most strongly connected rises in the networks with the largest potential to amplify each other. Polarization societies are more likely to trust information, true or false, than confirm their beliefs. So people are looking not on truth. People are looking on those channels of information or media which help to believe that you are right, that your position is true. And that's why it's something new, because media is not up of the process, it has to be a partner of the process. And audience started to be owners of the media, and that's why some of the journalists are looking for cooperation with audience, but they are using another tools, not truth, not professional messages or news or evidences, but they want to be like friends, and it's not okay, as for me. And the last but not least, Edelman Trust Barometers did a research in 28 countries, but it's about 2022. And 53% believe that their country is divided more than it was before. But let's look on the list. On the top, you will be surprised a little bit, it was Netherlands. 80% of people believe that the country was divided on the higher level than before. But we have to understand that it was a year of elections in this country. And far-right groups and conservative groups which use some specific language for having success in elections polarized the country for sure. On the second level was Brazil, then Sweden, France, Nigeria, US, Germany, UK. But if you will look on the same rating at the end of 2024, you will see that US will be on the top. I'm sure about that. Why? Because everyone is speaking about US, because all political technologists using the hate speeches or this deviation language, who are from your side, who are against your side in their conversations, and it's like technology to divide those who will be pro and against, and to try to use the audience which are in between. So we, last point, that the data which I presented mostly about democratic countries, or those who have open space for discussions. So that's why media has to find something in between to spread the truth. Do not want to spread this for 100% of audience, because you will not find 100% of audience which will waiting for truth from your side. And to understand that polarization, it's a part of diversity, and we have to build culture of this type of discussions, because social media just giving us a chance to see everything and to see everyone, smart and stupid people, on the same platform.
Thank you, Olga. And let me just provide a kind of disclaimer. So when I received the offer to moderate this panel and with the exact topic, I was very excited, because exactly what I'm doing, studying the Central and Eastern Europe countries, and this is what I observe on a daily basis, monitoring especially Hungarian, Slovak media. But unfortunately, exactly before our forum, the tragedy happened in Slovakia, and I really recommend you to follow this strategy, in a sense, exactly the focus of our topic, because you know that the title is pretty like theoretical, sophisticated, definitely interesting, but in practice, this is exactly what is going on in Slovakia, and with the very tragic consequences. And so right now we have, I think, the how to say, the best speaker for moderator, Yevhen Hlibovytsky. In a sense, Yevhen is combining both. He was a TV presenter, a journalist on the field, but also he is a think tanker. So my question is the same, but could you, I will share my mic with you, or you have. Could you share this, let's say, these both angles in terms of actually the role and responsibility of media in terms of polarization or polarized society we are living in right now?
Okay, I'll save some time. I'm privileged to be with such incredible panel, because you pretty much said everything I wanted to say, so I'll be very short. I think one of the things that we leave out of context is the complexity. And the job of the editor, the job of the publisher, even the job of reporter now has become way more sophisticated, because we have to include so many contexts that have become relevant. And if we want to close this gap between and mend these fractures, we have to, first of all, be aware of these contexts. And being a member of Supervisory Board of Public Service Broadcast, we have a very young team of editors. One of the reasons is because the older generation, Soviet-trained editors, were not able to deal with this. Not all of them, but many of them were not able to deal with this complexity of broadness of the view. How you learn about things, how you compare things, how you put them in the context. And the actual writing has become proportionately less of a work than actually understanding what you are writing about and how you should approach the subject. And what I see right now is kind of two models of journalism that exist in the same place. The old type, which is very reflective. It's kind of mirroring, you know, the reality, sometimes extorting this mirroring. And the other, which is becoming more sophisticated, more in-depth, smarter, but at the same time, it has a disadvantage of requiring a special skill on behalf of the audience to know how to read it. So I think I'm actually eager to move to this part of the discussion where we think what to do with it. So let me shut up at this point.
Okay, thank you. Let me take a few exactly, not hints, insights of Olga and Yevhen as well, and address Carolina and Terrell, you. We're still, I think, within our media bubble, thinking in a framework or within the framework of content making. But what media could do in a situation when it doesn't mean that content making doesn't matter, but what we should do in a reality when we have not readers who are searching or striving for facts, but we have believers. So how we should work with this audience just to find our believers, or how to move among different bubbles? Yes. So Carolina, if I may ask you to start.
I think one of the things journalists have to realize and embrace, especially, I would say this goes especially for journalists working in television, because we have a particular relation with our ego, and I can say that because I work in television, is journalism is not a popularity contest. Sometimes you have to say things to your audience or to your target audience that they are not willing to listen to. You have to offer that complexity that he was just talking about, and I think that is a marvelous concept, because that's where we exist. That's where we become important, in the shades of gray, in the yes but. That place where we are profoundly uncomfortable, even to our target audience, that's when we become necessary. And I think we have to really embrace that. So yes, hold on to your grandma saying you're wonderful, or to your mama saying you're wonderful, because many times you will not come across that from your audience, and that is okay, because our imperative is truth, or our ideal imperative is truth. I know it sounds very ambitious, but and someone could discuss that, but that should be our aspiration, not a popularity contest. And I really like the idea of believers. That's why I was bringing the whole religious metaphor, because I do think we're at a time where that happens. And I would even like to say that this is because of the convictions or ideological convictions of media, but it has to do with the business. It's more terrible than that. It has to do with the tyranny of metrics. It has to do with the ratings. It has to do with the fact that oversimplified, polarizing content is usually leading content in terms of ratings, in terms of metrics. But once again, media is not just any business, and this goes for people making decisions in business, in media. It's not just any business. It has a social role. It has an ethical imperative. And I think we as a society should also hold media accountable for that ethical imperative that goes for media companies. There's also one thing I would like to add. I'm sorry if my answer is being too long. This goes particularly for television or even for digital media. There is a tension between journalism and entertainment. Sometimes there is a tendency to even overrepresent certain facts or certain situations because they have visual impact. And that's not exactly what our audience might need to see at that time. Sometimes to talk about the complexity, maybe we have to offer more reflective content or more complex, or offer more complex situations, but that doesn't have an immediate impact. We should stick to the moral imperative. Yes, that's what I want to say about that.
Thank you. Terrell, the same question, but additional context. If you can share, so you was exactly here in Ukraine when the invasion started, and all the West, I mean your audience was exactly believers in the sense that the situation should go in a other direction, not that Ukraine will keep that. So how to work with such believers, yeah, or with believers at all as an audience?
Okay, well, simply put, the problem with coverage of Ukraine at the beginning of the war, the specific example, Ukraine will fall in 3 days, right? In this narrative you're speaking directly with. That is really simple. in America, most people who are trained in think tanks to talk about this part of the world got their education in Moscow and St. Petersburg and Saratov. And most of these people, quite frankly, are white males who don't understand oppression in their own countries. So how are they going to understand what's going on here? And that's just the blunt truth of the matter. I was an exception to that when I have a master's degree in Eastern European and Russian studies, and my first experience with this part of the world was in Georgia. And when I was in Georgia in 2008, when I was studying the Georgian language, I know that sounds, odd, but yeah, I did. But I was there when the Russians invaded. And there is this nostalgia in America about Russia, about this progressive entity and progressive politic in Russia that we all know don't exist. That plays a strong role in how people cover Ukraine. And so my responsibility as an independent journalist especially was to frame Ukraine within its own context. One of the reasons why much of our media did not start framing Ukraine in this proper context is because Ukraine was the second or third priority in our education system, because power centers power. And so much of that has to do, quite frankly, with the imperial and colonial construct of our own country in the United States. And so that type of attitude of not understanding black people, the Latinx community, kind of plays over into how you understand Ukraine. And so the way that we end up doing it is that being an independent journalist actually gave us more power to tell a more balanced story about Ukraine, because we have to stop assuming, and I'll end with this, we have to accept the fact that mainstream media has not always been the objective arbiters of information that we believe that they were. That's the first thing. And then also, we have to accept the fact that social media and the digital media, when it's used properly, can be just as effective as traditional media outlets. And with that, think about 2014 when the Maidan happened. Another event happened in the United States, and that was the Ferguson uprisings. I don't know if any of you heard about the founding of the Black Lives Matter movement. Excuse me, I was caught it. So these two movements, the Black Lives Matter movement and the Maidan, they shared something. Those were social media driven moments. It was where Ukrainians were saying, they were telling the West that you spell Kyiv, K-Y-I-V, as opposed to K-I-E-V. It was a decolonization of how America talked about Ukraine. And black Americans were also decolonizing how mainstream media talked about black people. And so these were social media driven moments. And if we learn to harness that power with social media and use it as an advantage, then I think that we will be able to begin to better combat disinformation, just learning to accept the new media environment that we're in, as opposed to having this very nostalgic memory of traditional media, that when you really peel the layers behind it, it never really existed in the way that we thought that it did.
Thank you. And so Olga and Yevhen, it's up to you to add, but I have additional input to make the question more tough. So what to do as believers when very often believers are in the newsrooms, when journalists are believers, and this is the context of misinformation.
Let me just jump to what you were saying. I think that one of the things that would allow us to understand each other better if we could bring each other closer in terms of seeing someone else through the eyes of our own experience. And in that sense, the experience of Ukraine, speaking in American terms, is a very black experience.
Yeah,
it's emancipation. It's emancipation of someone who has been for centuries exploited, and now is coming to realize their rights, their opportunities, and has the resistance from the old colonial structures. At the same time, one of the things that my think tank is focused on is the social impact of organized religion as an institution, and this is also extremely important. One of the things that we're currently researching, just amazing research, and I'm getting the updates from our analysts who are reading through the papers that have been put out over the last 20, 30 years by scholars in prominent universities across the world. The countries where church has lost its influence are the countries where in many cases, and there is more complexity, I'm simplifying the picture now, where the extremist movements are on the rise politically. Why is this? Because the moral, the demand for moral questions didn't disappear. But the institution that could respond to moral questions has been marginalized. And as a result, at a certain point, the populists, the popular media that is very keen about ratings and achieving high visibility figures, etc., have responded to something where they have no competence, because it's not up to a political populist or up to a news editor to say what is right and what is wrong. It's a philosophical discussion that requires a completely different setting. The role of media in that is to create the platform for this discussion and moderate it right. And in that sense, I think we have to be aware that we might have ended up in a deeper crisis than we think, because it's institutionalized. We have allowed the institutions that had their mission to move away from, as societies, to move away from those missions and become politicized, commercialized, beyond the truthfulness to their missions. And that's the big problem. And in that sense, Ukraine is a country that is rediscovering the truths of freedom of speech, for instance, at the same time getting examples from the West how this freedom of speech can be curbed. And this is the moment where the idealists in Ukraine feel themselves kind of in an awkward position, because, we believe that these are the virtues, but these virtues are compromised now. So what do we do? And the Ukrainian response is still very black and white. We're still very much only starting to understand how many shades of gray we have. We are pro-Western, but the West is failing us. But at the same time, we are still pro-Western because we share values. But many people are exploiting these values instead of standing tall with these values. And in that sense, this is an ongoing process, dynamic process, in which we have to try to understand that if we look through very narrow, only sectoral view, for instance, of media or political parties or diplomacy, we may not find a response. We have to look broader. And this is why complexity that I started in the beginning is so important.
Thank you for this insightful part and very intelligent way how to avoid my questions regarding believers. But in the newsroom, that's why Ola will answer.
Yeah, it's difficult to answer after Yevhen because he is very well known here as visionist. But let's speak honestly about believers. There are different types of believers because we can't simplify everything. And when we are speaking about those journalists which has a mission, and they believe in this mission, and they are ready to suffer in time to time because they will visit Ukraine, not only Lviv, but Kharkiv, for example, because they need to find this truth and to spread the truth with its own, his or her own audience. It's about believers, but it's about professional believers. So people which has a mission and has an idea, I believe they are believers. But we can speak like that about those who believe that the earth is flat, tiny ground, you know, and they believe in it. And unfortunately, there are such media in US and there are such audience in US. So let's spread or deviate believers because I believe that there are enough journalists which believe in truth and their mission. And my organization is one of the co-founders of International Center of Ukrainian Victory, and we are working on advocacy more than 2 years after full-scale invasion abroad. And we had millions of meetings with journalists in different countries. And time to time, it's about professional believers which ask what is happening in Ukraine, and then step by step advocated answering from their governments. And sometimes one interview can increase the interest of their audience, and this audience is pushing the government to do a right thing on the right side of the history. So I believe it's about believers. So let's separate stupid people, which believe in unbelievable things, and smart people, which has a mission.
Thank you for this, and let's have the last round of questions, or question one, and then we will move and ask audience to ask question. And so my last question to all of you, and Terrell, let's start from you. So please share your exactly cases, success stories, how you managed to structure the little chaos or the situation, the topic, with exact where you start, what was the key challenge in terms of working with the audience or to reach the audience or to actually explain the issue and the impact you actually reach. Or maybe it could be, let's say, sorry for this, like fuck up case that you believe that you can or could and you fail, which is also okay. Very often happened. Please.
Are we talking about my, a case of coverage that I've engaged in, right? Okay, so I'll explain how I was communicating about Ukraine to an audience. So most of my career, I worked in Black-owned media. And so I spend much of my time talking to African Americans. I graduated from a historically Black college in the United States. And so I don't know if any of you know, but Black people, they are the most loyal voters in the Democratic Party. And in order to become a presidential candidate out of the Democratic Party in particular, you have to get the majority of Black votes. It's a long, complicated story. But basically, when the war started, I had to think about how do I contextualize Ukraine in a way that my audience, that my community, that Americans in general will understand. Because quite frankly, it doesn't matter what color they are across America. They look at Ukraine and think, okay, I thought the Ukrainians and Russians, I thought that these were Slavs or they're white people, and I thought they all got along with each other. It sounds very simplistic, but you have to remember that outside of these circles, people don't really know anything about you. And so, like you said, the way that I make Ukraine readable and understandable to the audience, I use my own personal experience. I say the story of Ukraine is a very Black experience in many ways. The way that when you think about the colonialism, the ways in which Ukrainians were colonized via the language, Crimean Tatars, the way that Ukraine's carved up, that can be relatable when it comes to redlining of Black Americans, of the history of slavery and then Jim Crow. The Soviet Union fell in 1991. Keep in mind that in my country, Black Americans have only had their full rights since about the 1970s. So roughly out of more than 200 years, if we're thinking about 1776 as the birth of our nation, out of those roughly 250 years, Black Americans have only had full rights about 50 years out of that, okay? And so when I talk about Ukraine, I remind them of the very genocidal language that Putin used towards Ukrainians, which is very similar to how a lot of white racists and white supremacists talk about black people. Those types of examples and analogies, they translate to people. Because at the end of the day, it's really about why should you care? What about Ukrainian humanity do I need to feel a part of? And I think that's what it's drawn into, because keep in mind too that in our country, Black Americans are the most targeted for disinformation, particularly in this election. That is a fact for a wide range of reasons. And then also there are stereotypes about Ukraine. In our media ecosystem, you know, the MAGA crowd, right? The Marjorie Taylor Greens, the people who are holding up the aid for Ukraine for months and months on end. They have a specific narrative about you, which is, you know, it's not America first. And so white nationalism is literally hijacking Ukraine's national security and sovereignty. And so the story of Ukraine is one that I match with my own, because I have the personal experience and ability to share that story with people. And as an independent journalist, that gave me the power to speak about the country in ways that I couldn't if I were working at the AP or CNN or the BBC. And those, in addition to people who give you the traditional news and the delivery, I think it's important that people like me who do have traditional training to lean into my experience, because that was the way that I was able to get a wide audience of people who never really heard about Ukraine to have a better understanding. And I'll close with this. I mean, I don't know if any of you follow my coverage, but I was doing things. I was with the territorial defense units. I was helping people to flee. But when I knew my stories had an impact, I knew it about a month ago. I was in Brooklyn, where I'm from, and I was in my neighborhood is mostly a Jamaican and Caribbean neighborhood. And I was going to a fish market. And this Jamaican woman came up to me and said, "Hey, aren't you that dude that was in Ukraine?" And I said, "Yes, mind you, I'm getting my salmon and whatever I'm getting, right?" And she said, "Well, I want to thank you because I understood this country now. I mean, I didn't know anything before, but now I do. This Jamaican lady will never come to Ukraine, but she saw someone who looked like her and someone that she trusted." And so I think everything that people are talking about goes around trust. It goes around building community. And I think that that's what we all have to do with each other. And so in my journalism, in telling the story of Ukraine, it was not only about just sharing the general facts and information about what was happening on the ground. I was building community. I was drawing parallels that made us feel better connected to each other. And so I felt really happy, and that lady at the fish market gave me an indication that I was doing the right thing.
Yeah, thank you, Terrell. Thank you. Carolina, your story.
Okay, I've been to Ukraine 4 times. This is my 4th time. I was here for the first time on February 25th, 2022. And then I came back a couple of times, one time by myself and the rest with my media. I work for Argentina's main news network. What I found out covering Ukraine and covering humanitarian crisis and political unrest all over Latin America is that journalism is about facts, but it's also about humanity. It's also about heart. It's also about building a bridge of empathy. Actually, just now, Terrell, before the panel, he was asking me, do people care about Ukraine and Argentina? And I said, yes, because Ukraine is familiar, because it speaks to us on an intimate level. We are granddaughters, we are descendants of immigrants who flee from war a long time ago, but we actually even have a big Ukrainian diaspora in Argentina. We know what it's like to fight for your identity, for your right to be who you are. That's why it wasn't hard for me to explain that this war was not territorial. This was about existence. So I would say that if we stick to that imperative to also be a bridge of empathy and to embrace universal values like human rights, then that's a pretty good compass to follow, you know? As far as success stories, I would include Ukraine in that, in the sense that it did change my career. I wouldn't attribute myself the merit of that. I would attribute it to Ukraine because of how powerful the stories are, and how Ukrainians have taught me a lot of what I know about resistance and about the will to fight for your right to exist. I would say something about a particular story I did actually a couple months after I left Ukraine for the first time. I don't know if any of you have heard about the Venezuelan exodus and the migratory crisis in Latin America. We have mainly three autocratic regimes in Latin America: Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. Actually, we have a very particular situation in El Salvador right now, but I wouldn't include it there, but it's still kind of something that we should be following up. But we have those three situations that have caused, along with the Haitian crisis, a huge humanitarian crisis in Latin America. And there's a particular place where that humanitarian crisis is expressed with a lot of cruelty, and that place is called the Darien Gap. It's a jungle right at the heart of Latin America. It's between Colombia and Panama, and people go there for 3 to 10 days with their families, with their little kids, to cross the jungle. It's one of the most dangerous jungles in the world. The place is practically ruled by drug cartels, and they expose themselves to the most dehumanizing things I have ever seen and heard in my life, just to get their chance to cross Colombia, to go to Panama, to go all the way up Central America, and get their very fine chance of going into the United States and embracing the American dream. Of course, that chance is very slim, and they can go through the worst things you can imagine. In Argentina, there's a lot of ideological divisions as to how we see these regimes: the Cuban regime, the Venezuelan regime. In particular, if you're more left-wing, you will be guided to thinking that mainstream media wants to show that left-wing's government kick people out of their countries, that they persecute, that they are cruel. So for me, covering the Darien Gap was a way of setting the story straight and sticking to the facts and sticking to the stories and building that bridge of empathy, whereas you will have a common ground in which you will show that stories, Exodus never lie, migrants never lie. They tell the story of a fleeing nation that is striving for their freedom, that is striving for their dignity, and that cannot be biased by ideological views. That is irrefutable facts. Those are human stories. Those are people walking through a jungle telling you something seriously wrong. And that, I think, was one of the most powerful stories I had the privilege to do, because it had that power of building that irrefutable bridge of empathy, where none of the polarizing crap can get in the way of that. You know, it's human dignity at stake. So I would suggest we stick to the fact that journalism is about facts, but it's also about humanity.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Ola. You know, it's up to you what story to choose, but you know, my question additional is about the exactly manifesto of sustainable peace. Who didn't read so far, please do. But this is kind of a message from the nation at war to the world, and so if you can share.
Thank you. Of course, I'm not a journalist, and I don't have such exciting experience to every people inside the country which didn't know anything about Ukraine. But I believe that Ukrainian civil society and think tanks and other organizations did a great job. And we have success story. It's about narratives, because you can change the information about some of the event in Ukraine, or you can show that Russia lies here or there, but it doesn't matter if you are living on these wide waves of news. We have to change narratives. And that was Ukrainian civil society working for years, and I believe we have success. In 2014, when Revolution of Dignity won in Ukraine, I visited Brussels with my colleagues from different NGOs, and we had a great panel, and few distinguished people in audience with French and Belgian passports asked how to be with a country where there is so huge nationalism waves, and we believe that unfortunately Ukraine is not moving into the right direction. That's why how to support Ukraine. It was after the Revolution of Dignity. Then we had presidential elections, and I answered, sorry guys, but in France, far-right party may have majority in your parliament. Do you know the results of far-right parties in Ukraine? It's less than 2%. So we spent a decade, unfortunately, for having this conversation with the partners that Ukraine is a very well-developed democratic country, because society has requests to have this type of the ruling system in the country. And even during the martial law period in Ukraine and after full-scale invasion, if you will look on the surveys, you will see that there is no request for having strong hand in this country. Do you know what does it mean? That democracy is added value for this society, and it's a part of DNA. When I visited Northern Ireland and I researched this case because I was participated in Minsk process for 2 years as negotiators in political subgroup because of the political background and this electoral background from my side. It was very interesting to speak with representatives of UK, because they were very open to Ukraine, to share their case, to try to help, to show how the negotiations looks like, and so on and so forth. But the first question was, we can't understand your narrative. What does it mean, Ukraine? So we have sympathy to Ukraine, we know something about Ukraine, but we can't understand your narrative. A few months ago, when I visited London, the border controller asked me in a very late period of night, he asked me, what is the reason of your visit? I said, to help Ukraine to win. And you know what he did? He said, I know everything about Ukraine. He hugged me and put the stamp. I believe it's a victory of Ukrainian society. Because narratives change in EU, in UK, somehow in Africa. I visited Nigeria and I'm going to visit Ghana next month. I believe that we need to speak about our DNA, to spread our history, Fafa history and current history, and to be understandable for people. And last point about media, but because I believe that we won the war with Russia before full-scale invasion. According to the Economist rating, Ukraine before full-scale invasion was fully developed electoral democracy, because we have a competition even during martial law period. And it broke all the plans, try to deviate Ukraine from those Western countries which has resources for helping Ukraine now. It's the main important for surviving during this period. And many years ago, when we have these discussions, does Ukraine will be democratic or undemocratic, we did a huge campaign here in Ukraine with Ukrainian media in 2019-2020s. We covered pro bono with bigger national TV channels, more than 40 million of audience. And we spread information from the side of believers, because media had a vision that there is a mission to help Ukraine to organize free and fair elections. And 2 years before full-scale invasion, Russia lost a chance to say Ukraine is the same as Russia. We have corruption, we have problem with democracy, we have uninclusive society, and so on and so forth. That's why I have to highlight that manifesto of Sustainable Peace Manifesto is one of the tools to show our partner the vision of Ukraine, how to build sustainability of the peace in Europe and all over the world, because Ukraine needs to build justice for Russia. I'm not going into details, don't worry about that. Ukraine has to be EU member, because we will do reform even during period of war. And it's like our guide to survive and to be developed. And Ukraine needs to be a member of NATO. Unfortunately, we need to have tool and equipment for defend ourselves, even if Ukrainian army will liberate the territories till the borders 1991.
Thank you very much. Just a second.
I will waive my story just for the sake of time and questions.
So I have an offer, a deal. Yeah, the deal is, so I don't want to skip you, but let's ask the audience the question, and no matter who will raise the hand, you should ask question Yevhen, and he will address your question with his success story. So please, who want to ask the question to Yevhen? Okay. Please, yeah, first row. Mr. Andriy?
It's about historical narratives and the spelling of Kyiv versus Kyiv. In fact, I think that by instilling in people's minds the version of KYIV, we have relinquished a huge chunk of our historical legacy. Because the spelling Kyiv, K-I-E-V, came into European languages from the Old Rus language, the direct precursor of the Ukrainian language. While insisting on Kyiv, we hark back to maybe 18th or 19th century, and under Kyiv came to France long before this. So it's about, do we sacrifice for the sake of being different the right to fight and win in a much harder struggle? Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there was more of a statement than a question. I'd just say that I don't see why future generations cannot know about this historical persona as Anne de Kyiv.
Okay, so we have time for one more at least question. Not to Yevhen, so please, it's not obligatory to ask him. So we have three more very... okay, we have hand here. Okay, please.
The question is to Terrell. Ms. Jared, I'm with the Ukrainians, American.
For me?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Oh, is it okay? To anyone? Okay. Well, okay, I'm going to point to the title, which is How Do Media Mend the Fractured World? I'm curious how you navigate that between Palestine and Ukraine as you are acting.
I can't hear you.
I'm pointing to the title. What media can do to mend the fractured world? And I'm curious as to if you can speak to how you do that between Palestine and Ukraine.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, this is one of your last actually podcasts. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
exactly.
why. So it was the.
Yeah. So thank you for that question. So I'll just be very direct. I know that this issue with Palestine, well, Gaza in particular, is a very controversial one. I don't think it should. I think for me it's very simple. I've been to the West Bank. I'm going to be very clear. I think that I think that we are intelligent enough and emotionally intelligent enough to understand that what happened on October 7th is bad, that it's terrorism. I think that if we want to be morally consistent about human rights and about the laws that we want Russia to follow, that they should be applied to Israel. I don't think that that is controversial. I think the reason why you have so much why we have such a tension in the United States over this is that many people in America, they see the moral inconsistency in how the West and the world rightfully is condemning Russia. I believe that without a doubt that Russia is committing a genocide here in Ukraine. I 100% believe that. I pair it with Palestine simply because, one, just as I've been in Ukraine, I've also been to Palestine. What's going on there is apartheid. Just as my eyes and my ears don't lie to me about Ukraine, my eyes and my ears don't lie to me about what's going on in Palestine. And what makes it hard is not me saying that, it's people fearing that if you do say that, then you'll be accused of anti-Semitism. Quite frankly, it's no different than Russians accusing Ukrainians and other folks of this bullshit notion of Russophobia.
Nazism.
Huh?
Or Nazism.
Or Nazism. And so it's never been difficult for me. Now, I've gotten a lot of pushback for it. What I find interesting is that when the full-scale invasion started, I had a number of people who were following me. I had something like 500,000 followers on Twitter. When I started talking about Palestine, I lost 50,000 followers. 50,000. They can all go to hell. And I say this because if we're talking about truth and facts, sometimes the truth is not going to be comfortable. Sometimes the truth is going to make us confront the things that we thought were true and we turn out to be false. The truth is going to make us challenge the ways in which we think about how power is positioned in the world. And we can talk about what's really, and the biggest tragedy with this is that in America, in Brooklyn, in my community, anti-Semitism is rampant. Anti-Semitism is a real thing, which increased exponentially under the Trump administration. It was in Charlottesville in 2017, there was white men who are going down in a community in the state of Virginia who are saying Jews will not replace us. There are far more police officers, and we function as a semi-police state in the United States. Far more police officers that violently respond to pro-Palestinian protesters than these white supremacists who are saying Jews will not replace us. And I see it with my own eyes. And so the truth is being morally consistent. The truth speaks truth to power. And that includes Israel, in response to its overreaction to what happened with the terrorist attacks of October 7th, because that country, that nation has been under apartheid and siege long before October 7th. So I find it very simple to be morally consistent because it's the right thing to do. But finally, it's the toughest thing to do because you can't be afraid of people saying losing followers and people accusing you of all kinds of things that aren't true. So I hope that helps.
May I just pick up
yes, so, yeah, please, Yevhen.
I just wanted to pick up on one thing. There's tremendous historical connection between the Jewish community in Ukraine and Israel. And similarly to how it's difficult to penetrate with Ukrainian story, for instance, in the United States or in Argentina or elsewhere, it's much more difficult for the Palestinian story to penetrate Ukraine because there's simply no carriers of this experience that could actually be the witness and be the speaker. And that's, I think, exactly where the mission of media is crucial, to be able to connect what is not connected otherwise. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't want to be the guy who will tell that party is over, but we should wrap up. But yeah, let me thank to all the speakers and audience for this brilliant discussion. We warm up. This is very good. So please catch our speakers in the back and ask your questions. Thank you one more time, and yeah, have a nice stay here for this day. Yeah, thank you.